Hello everyone, welcome to our digital class of software engineering. So, we have discussed the different types of software process models, and in this class we are going to discuss the individual process activities. We have 4 process activities, that are requirement specification, design and implementation, validation and evaluation. And today's class we are going to talk about the requirement specification. So, let us see what actually that means when we are talking about the software requirement specification. What are the phases there, that these phases, when we are going carry out these phases, then we can call our software specification phase has completed. So, let us see. So, before going to our first process activity, that is software specification, let us see what actually the process activity means. So, actually the real software processes are interleaved sequence of 3 main activities, and by carrying out the 3 main activity we can achieve our main goal, that is specification, design and implementation, testing and your evaluation. So, what are those activities? Those activities are the technical activity, and the second is collaborative activity, and the third is managerial activity. So, what actually that technical and collaborative and managerial activity means? So, suppose take some example. In case of technical activity, when we are using some technical tools to write our program or to implement the system, those are the technical activity. That means the professional software developers who are involved for developing the software, they are carrying out the technical activities. What are the technical tools, what are the current technology, what are the programming tools, what are the testing tools, what are the debugging tools, whatever the technical tools they are used in case of developing the software, that means they are carrying out the technical activity. Next is what? Next is collaborative activity. So, what actually that collaborative activity? Suppose our college wants a LAN connection. That means there are like 10 or 12 buildings. So, we want a LAN connection. So, we will go for what? We will go and contact some company which will provide networking for us, but that company is actually based on web hosting. So, what will they do? They will contact some other parties. That means the first party is we, that are our college. The second party is the web hosting company whom we try to contact, that we want some networking. Then the second party, that is the web hosting company, will contact some other parties, because they are the web hosting companies, they may not provide the networking facilities to us. So, there are some internet service providers, so they will contact them, and those third party will provide networking to the college through the web hosting company. So, that means the web hosting company and the internet service provider company, they are working with each other by the collaboration. So, that is the collaborative activity. And the third activity is what? Managerial activity. So, managerial activity means what? In the management level, there are some persons, like there are some project coordinators, there are some managers, they will carry out the managerial activity to check whether the progress is going on, the software is developing or not, what about the progress. They have planned something like in the end of the day we should develop this much of software or this much of subsystem, then they will check whether that much of subsystem has been developed at the end of the day or not. So, that is the managerial activity. So, by carrying out these 3 activities, that is technical activity, collaborative activity and the managerial activity, we can achieve our main process activities. Those are specification, design and implementation, testing or validation and the evaluation. So, these are the main activities. By carrying out those, we can call it as a process activity. The next process activities is that the 4 basic process activities of specification, development, validation and evaluation are organized differently in different development process. So, what actually that means? That means we have some fundamental 4 process activities, and it depends on which type of software we are going to develop. So, that will decide how we are going to organize these 4 basic activities. In case of waterfall model, these 4 basic activities are organized in a sequential manner, but in case of incremental model, these 4 basic activities are organized in an interleaved manner. So, it depends on the software which we are going to develop, then we will decide how to organize these 4 set of activities. Next, the software processes are new tool supported. That means whatever the tools and whatever the technology that are trending now, we will adapt those tools and those technology to develop the software. The software developer can use different tools to help them, because if the software developer is going to develop the software by his own without any support from other tools or other colleagues, then it will be very difficult and it will be very time taking to develop the software. That is why the software developer are using some tools that will help the software developer to develop the software easily, quickly and with a less effort. So, what are the tools? If we will go for the requirement specification, then we can use the requirement management system. The requirement management system is actually a tool. By using this requirement management system, we can get a requirement specification document, and after getting the requirement specification document, we can go for the design, and for the design we can use design model tools. By using these design model tools, we can create some activity model, some system models, some system architecture. So, there are some system design tools that will help the software developer or the software designer to design the system model. Next, for the implementation, that means what? That means we want to code the design, we want to write some program. So, for that we have some program editors. So, in case of program editor, that will help us to write the program for each and every component or each and every subsystem. And after writing the code, then what we will go for? We will go for the testing, that means validation. And for the validation, we have some automated system testing tools, and we have a debugger that will check if our system is functioning correctly or not. So, we have some automated testing tools and debuggers to validate our software. So, these are the tools that the software developer can use to develop the project very easily. So, these are the process activities. Why we call it as a process activities, that we have seen just now. Then what is our first activities? That is software specification. So, let us go for the software specification. So, in case of software specification, first we have to decide what are the services and what are the functionalities that my user wants or that my customer expect from the software. That means for whom, that means based on which functionalities and based on which service I am going to develop the software, that we have to decide first. Then we will go for the constraint. The constraints means what? Your technical constraint, your non-technical constraint. Technical constraint means what? Speed, your memory, your execution time, your data transfer time. So, these are the technical constraints. We have to define what are the technical constraints there, and we have to also define what are the non-technical constraints. So, what are the non-technical constraints? That means budget constraint, that means with this limited budget we have to develop the software. The time constraint, that means within this specified time period we have to develop the software. So, these are the constraints we have to first define. So, our first point says that the process of establishing what services are required, that means what are the functionalities we require or what are the functionalities the customer expect from our software, and what are the constraints. The constraint means for the operation and the development of the system, what are the technical and non-technical constraints. So, by defining the service, that means your function and the constraint, we will go for the second phase, that is requirement engineering process. So, The requirement engineering process means it is a combination of 4 phases. By carrying out the 4 phases, we can find a SRS document, that means a software requirement specification document. So, what are the phases? Let us see. So, in case of requirement engineering process, we have the first activity or first phase, that is feasibility study. So, in case of feasibility study, we have to decide that if our system is technically and financially feasible to build the system. The next phase is requirement illustration and analysis. So, here we have to define what do the system stakeholders require or expect from the system. That means, what are the customers' actual requirements that we have to define in case of requirement illustration and analysis. And the third phase is requirement specification. So, here we have to define all the requirements in detail, and the fourth one is requirement validation. That means, we have to check either the requirement whatever we specified in case of requirement specification that actually meet the user requirement or not. So, let us see the activity model, then we will get a basic knowledge about the requirement engineering process. So, what we have concluded that in case of requirement engineering process, there are 4 distinct phases. We have to follow the first phase, that is feasibility study. So, here the first phase is what? Feasibility study. So, this is the process, that is feasibility study, and from the feasibility study process, what we will get? We will get a feasibility report. So, what actually this means? The feasibility study, what we are going to carry out in case of feasibility study. So, in case of feasibility study, we will decide whether the system which we are going to develop, that is technically and financially feasible or not. So, what actually that means? The technically sound. Technically sound means what? Suppose in case in our last example, what I have just told, that we want a LAN connection and we contact to a web hosting service. So, that web hosting company will decide whether I will take this project or not, because they are familiar with web hosting projects and we are asking for networking projects. That means, that is the networking project is not technically feasible to the web hosting company. That is why they will contact some other company which provide the networking service. So, that is the technical feasibility. If we are not technically sound to take the project, then we will decide whether we will go for the other company that are in our collaboration, or we will not take the project, so that we will abort the project from the very beginning. That means, we will deny the customer that sorry, we are not going to develop your project, because the techniques or the technology that are need to develop the software, that is not with us. We are not technically sound for this project. And what is the financially feasibility? That means, we have to decide what is the profit. Suppose a customer wants a project, and for that project the customer will give us 20,000 rupees only. Then we will decide if there are some projects we have been developed before. If yes, then we will reuse that, and by reusing the previous software, then the development cost will be reduced. Then we will decide if my customer will give 20,000 to me, then it will financially feasible. That means, it will cost only 5,000 and I will earn 15,000 of profit. So, that means, now the project is financially feasibility. But if the customer wants a project with 10,000, but we need 20,000 to develop the project, that means, there will be a loss of 10,000. Then we will decide, no, we cannot develop the project, we have to abort the project. So, in case of feasibility study, we are deciding whether our system is technically and financially feasible or not. If it is technically and financially feasible, then we will go ahead. So, from the feasibility report, we have to decide 3 things: whether we want to go ahead, that means we are agreed to take the project, We will develop the project and we will deploy the project to the customer in time, in budget also. So, that is the first thing we have to decide. If that is not technically and financially feasibility, then we can say, sorry, we cannot develop your project. That means here we are going to abort the project. And the third thing is, we have to think again. If it is not technically and financially feasible, then we can think again. That means, if there are 10 methods to develop the software that my customer wants, then what is the best method we have to adapt. So, we have to think again that whether we are going to develop the software or we have to abort the software. So, that is the feasibility study. After the feasibility study, we will go for the requirement elicitation and analysis. And from the requirement elicitation and the analysis, we will develop a system model. That means, here we are defining what actually my customer requires. That means, what actually my customer expect from the software, that we have to decide here. So, that is the requirement specification. After the requirement elicitation and analysis, we will go for the requirement specification. Here, from the requirement specification, we will finalize what are the user and system requirements. So, what actually this user and system requirement means? The user requirement means what actually my customer expect from the software. What are the functions? What are the services that we need to implement in our software? That is the user requirement. What are the actual requirements of my customer? And what are the system requirements? The system requirements means what? The system requirement means to accommodate the user requirement, what are the softwares and what are the hardwares we need to develop. That is the system requirement. So, there are two requirements we have to specify in case of requirement specification. The first one is user requirement specification, the second one is system requirement specification. In case of user requirement specification, we have to specify what actually my stakeholder needs or what actually my end user or customer needs. And in case of system requirement specification, we have to specify to fulfill our customer need, what are the hardware and what are the software, what are the system requirements we need to develop. So, those are the user and system requirements. And after that, we will go for the validation, requirement validation. That means, here we have to check whether whatever the requirement we have been specified in this case, that is valid or not. That means, that specification is actually meets the user requirement or not. If the requirement validation here, if we found that we have mentioned some other functionalities, but our customer do not want that, or some of the specification has been omitted, then we can go back to the requirement specification. Here we can go back, here we have to correct that, then we will go back to requirement elicitation and analysis. Then here also we have to correct that, and after the correction what we will get? We will get the system model. So, from the requirement elicitation and analysis, then what we will get? We will get the system model, and from the requirement elicitation and analysis, we will go for the requirement specification. Then we will again go for the requirement validation. And what we get? We get a requirement documentation. That means, the system model that has been released from the requirement elicitation and analysis, the user and system requirements that has been released from requirement specification, and the requirement validation. From these three things we will get the requirement document. So, this is our software requirement document, and by looking at this requirement document we will go for the design phase. So, what we have concluded that for developing the software developer are using some tools, and by using the tools they can develop the software very quickly. And the first process activity is what? Software specification. In case of software specification, first we we will define the requirements, that is the functional requirements, that means what are the functions and what are the service that our customer expect from the software and what are the constraints on that. Then we will go for the requirements engineering process, and for carrying out the requirement engineering process we have 4 distinct phases, that is feasibility study. There we can decide whether our system that we are going to develop, that is technically and financially feasible or not. If it is technically and financially feasible, then we will go for developing the project. If it is not feasible, then we can abort the project. Then we will go for the requirement elucidation and analysis. There we have to define what actually my customer needs. Then we will go for the requirement specification. In case of requirement specification, there we have to define 2 types of specification, that is the user specification, that means the end user specification, what they need, and the system specification, that means to fulfill the end user's need, what at the system we require. Then from that we will go for the requirement validation. There we check whether whatever the requirements we have write down, that actually meets the customer needs or not. If it is not the correct one, then we will again go for the requirement elucidation and analysis. If it is correct, then we can go for the requirement document, and by looking at the requirement document we will go for the second process activity, that is design. In our next class we will go for the design activity. Thank you.